And he believed that we carried not just traumas from childhood, but we inherited from the deeper, or what he called the collective unconscious, the universal memory.
You're falling into yourself, into something deeper that your mind can't explain but your soul already knows. And long before anyone gave that experience a name, Carl Jung had already written about it. He didn't label it depression, he called it the descent, a sacred journey inward. At the height of his career, Carl Jung walked away from the world, not to escape, but to find something deeper than success or sanity. What he discovered there would later be recorded in a massive, mystical book never meant for the public, the Red Book. And today, we'll discover the dark truths found within its pages. The descent is the door. In that book, he spoke about something most people run from. The feeling of emptiness that comes before a soul is reborn. Jung wrote, "I had to understand that I was losing something to gain something greater. The spirit of the depths taught me that my soul is not mine, but I am hers." What does that mean? It means this: what you are feeling is not failure. It's not sadness. It's not weakness. It is the slow dissolving of an identity that no longer fits. The more you resist it, the longer the pain will last. But if you allow the descent, if you sit with the silence instead of filling it, you will begin to hear a voice, one that's always been there, waiting, and it's your own. We were raised to believe that strength means staying the same, being in control, always on. But Jung knew what the mystics of old whispered in caves and temples, that the greatest strength is in letting go. A Rosetta Stone for the unconscious. The Red Book could be considered the Rosetta Stone for the unconscious. In it, Carl Jung didn't just record dreams, he entered them. He didn't analyze symbols from the outside. He spoke with them directly. He let the unconscious pour through him like a river, not knowing where it would lead, but trusting that within the chaos there was a hidden code. And that's what Liber Novus became, the deepest, rawest, most unfiltered conversation ever documented between the waking mind and the dreaming soul. He did what curanderos across Latin America have done for centuries. He listened to the language of the invisible. The Nahuales, shape-shifting spirit companions of Mesoamerican lore, weren't so different from Jung's archetypes. They lived within, wearing masks made of dreams, memory, and ancestral fear. The curandero, much like Jung himself, doesn't diagnose from the outside. He descends into the underworld of the soul, into vision, into silence, and brings back the medicine. In this way, Liber Novus is Jung's shamanic record, his own Camino del Alma. The dreamscape that emerged in his pages mirrors the traditions of the Andes, where the Alto Misayok, a high Andean mystic, journeys into other realms, not to escape reality, but to bring wisdom back. Like the Brujo de Luz, who dreams with the ancestors and reads the wind, Jung became a kind of mapmaker of the psyche's terrain. He etched the contours of the unconscious, not with instruments, but with myth, dialogue, and surrender. This is why the Red Book is a kind of Rosetta Stone. It's not just about Jung's mind. It's about the mind that exists in all of us when we stop pretending to be separate from our shadow. Just like the Latin American mystic traditions remind us that the spirit world is not out there, but pulsing beneath the surface of everything. We too are haunted by truths waiting to be remembered. The descent Jung experienced is no different than what indigenous healers call the initiatory wound. The illness that is not really illness, but a calling. The sadness that is not weakness, but awakening. The madness that is not madness, but the spirit breaking through the noise of the world. In this context, your sadness isn't random. It's a sign that your inner world is stirring, that the ancestors, or the archetypes, are knocking. And if you go within, not with fear, but with reverence, you might find, as Jung did, that what looks like falling apart is actually falling in. So we read the Red Book not to understand Jung's descent. We read it to remember our own, and we realize the unconscious has always spoken. Through the jaguar dreams of the Nahual, through the whispered prayers of the curandera, through the breathless visions of a Swiss psychiatrist cracking open the veil of the modern mind. It is not madness. It is the soul speaking in its native tongue. The inner world in Liber Novus. In the Red Book, Jung describes conversations with figures from his own inner world, archetypes that challenged him, guided him, and shattered his old beliefs. He didn't treat them as fantasies. He treated them as real as breath. And through them, he remembered something many forget, that the world inside is just as real, if not more real, than the world outside. He called this journey active imagination, but others have called it vision, meditation, prophecy, or even prayer. Whatever name you give it, the point is the same. When the outer world begins to crack, something sacred stirs inside. Have you noticed it? That the things you used to chase no longer satisfy, that relationships built on convenience now feel hollow, that you can't fake it anymore, even with yourself. These aren't signs of sadness, they're signs of separation, and what's separating isn't you from life, it's the old you falling away from the real one. Jung wrote of a dark figure who visited him in his visions, a man with horns, a strange guide who asked disturbing questions. Many would call this a demon, but Jung didn't run. He spoke with him, he listened, and in doing so, he discovered something vital. The shadows you fear often hold the keys you've been searching for. In ancient Egyptian belief, the soul traveled through the underworld after death, not to be punished, but to be purified. Every monster, every trial was part of a process to release the illusions that had clung to the soul like dust. Only after passing through the darkness could the heart be weighed against the feather of truth. What if you're in that underworld now? What if this discomfort, this fog, this nothingness is not death, but rebirth? And what if the reason it hurts so much is because you're still trying to carry who you used to be? The Red Book is not a manual, it's a mirror. Jung never pretended to be a guru. He shared his madness, his dreams, his doubt, because he knew the greatest healing happens when someone finally says, "Me too." You are not weak because you feel lost. You are not broken because you feel numb. You are in the process, the sacred in-between, the chrysalis. Do you remember the parable of the seed? Before a seed becomes a tree, it must first fall into the soil and disappear. It doesn't bloom right away. It breaks open underground, in the dark, in the quiet, with no applause. It doesn't even look like it's growing, but it is. So are you. Jung said that modern people suffer not so much from diseases but from meaninglessness. That is the silent hunger beneath the world's noise. And no job, no fame, no lover can fill it. Because that hunger is not for the world. It is for the self. In Jung's language, the self is not the ego, not the personality. It is the wholeness behind the mask, the divine blueprint you were born with. And the more you chase what the world told you to want, the further you drift from it. But the moment you stop running, the moment you fall silent, the self begins to rise. It doesn't rise in fireworks or thunder. It rises in the quiet urge to walk a different path, to say no when you used to say yes, to rest when you used to hustle, to finally hear your own breath. You're not crazy, you're not lazy, you're not depressed, you're remembering. You are falling into a deeper current that no one taught you about because they had forgotten too. Jung believed that the psyche is always trying to heal itself. even through breakdowns, even through madness. It is the soul's way of pulling you back to your center, and the more you suppress it, the more violent the return. But if you listen, even a little, something begins to happen. Not instantly, not overnight, but eventually the heaviness lifts, and you realize that the pain wasn't punishment. It was the pressure needed to open your soul. This is the beginning of your red book. You don't need to see angels or draw mandalas to be on the journey. You just need to tell the truth. First to yourself, then to the world. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who your parents expected, not who your social media presents, but who you are underneath it all. So if you feel like your life is falling apart, maybe it's falling together in a way you never expected. And maybe, just maybe, your sadness isn't sadness at all. It's the soul whispering, wake up. The old world is gone. Come back to me. The archetypes that guard your soul's door. You thought this path would be calm, clean, peaceful. But the moment you began to turn inward, to listen instead of run, something unexpected happened. Resistance. Not from the world, from you. From deep within your own mind, voices rose. Some questioned you, others mocked you, and a few tried to scare you back into comfort. Carl Jung encountered them too. He wrote about them, not as metaphors, but as living forces of the psyche, guardians, tricksters, shadows, wise ones. These weren't characters in a story. These were archetypes, primordial energies passed down through the collective unconscious, and they stand between you and your awakening. Why? Because the path to wholeness is not straight. It is guarded, and if you are to become more than a mask, you must pass through them all. When Jung began to write the Red Book, he wasn't documenting dreams. He was engaging in something ancient. Shamans called it journeying, desert prophets called it wrestling with angels, mystics called it divine madness, but Jung called it active imagination, and through it he met forces that didn't just exist inside him, but somehow beyond him, speaking through symbols and myth. There was Philemon, a wise old man with wings, who appeared to Jung and became his inner teacher. There was Salome, a blind temptress representing longing and intuition. There was Elijah, the prophet, holding a torch in the dark. And then there were the unnamed ones, the dark ones, the chaotic energies that tore apart his ego and made him question everything. Jung didn't try to destroy them. He spoke to them. He listened. He wrote down their words, even when they made no sense, even when they terrified him, because deep down, he knew something few understand. You do not conquer the inner world. You form a relationship with it. Think of ancient myths. Before the hero ever finds the treasure, they must pass through dragons, riddles, labyrinths, and guardians. This was not fiction. It was a mirror of the soul's path. And those same archetypes live in you. They are the voice that says, "You're not enough." The one that whispers, "Go back. Stay asleep." The one that tempts you into comfort right before the breakthrough. They are not your enemies. They are tests, initiations. And every one of them carries a gift you cannot receive unless you stop running and look them in the eyes. The Red Book is not a safe book. It is a dangerous one, because it tells the truth that most spiritual books are afraid to say. Writing it, Jung let his mind unravel, not recklessly, but willingly, because he knew that only by confronting the chaos within could he ever find true peace. And in doing so, he uncovered a secret. The psyche is not linear. It's a house with many rooms. Most of us live in just one room, our surface identity. But the others, that's where the gods live. The fears, the ancestors, the unlived lives, the voices of old civilizations echoing through our blood. And once you step into those other rooms, you don't come back the same. One of the oldest Sufi parables speaks of the gate of the soul. Behind that gate, it says, are 7 guardians. Each one asks a question, each one shows a mirror. Only when the seeker has answered truthfully and accepted what they see can they pass. The questions aren't intellectual. They are questions like, who are you without your name? What do you cling to when no one is watching? Can you sit in silence without begging it to end? These are the same riddles Jung was faced with, and these are the riddles you must face too. What are archetypes really? They are not fictional. They are not personality types. They are energies, shapes of consciousness that appear again and again across all cultures, all times. The mother, the shadow, the hero, the child, the trickster, the sage. You've seen them in movies, myths, dreams. But Jung realized something most people miss. They're not just in the stories. They are the storytellers. They live behind your thoughts, beneath your habits. They show up as emotions that don't make sense, urges you can't explain, dreams you didn't ask for. And until you meet them consciously, they run your life from the background. The occult traditions knew this long before psychology. Alchemy spoke of guardians at the threshold, forces that would appear to block the unprepared from touching higher knowledge. In Kabbalah, they are the qliphoth, the shells, the false forms, the distortions that trap seekers in illusion. In ancient Greece, they were the daimons, spirits between gods and men, bringing both madness and genius. And Jung gave them a language the modern world could understand. But he never said they were just symbols. He believed the psyche was far larger than we think, that it wasn't confined to the brain, that it extended outward, into myth, into matter, even into time itself. He once said, "The gods have become diseases, the mysteries have become neuroses." What he meant was, we no longer worship the gods of old, but their energies haven't disappeared. They've gone underground, into the psyche. And if we don't meet them as guides, we meet them as anxiety, addiction, depression, confusion. That's why your sadness might not be sadness. It might be the God knocking at your door. So what do? You go. Deeper, you listen. You write your own red book, not for anyone else, but for the part of you that remembers the way back. You stop trying to fix yourself and start meeting yourself. You let the voices speak. You let the pain teach. You stop pretending to be okay and instead become honest. Because awakening doesn't come from perfection. It comes from participation. And one day, maybe not far from now, you'll look back and realize the shadow was never your enemy. It was your twin. The gatekeeper was never there to stop you. He was waiting for your readiness. And the pain was never punishment. It was the price of the key leading to the vanishing light. Why your breakdown is a divine invitation. Not gradually, but as if someone shut the door behind you. Everything that once brought joy, books, breathwork, crystals, mantras, even the soft glow of spiritual community, suddenly feels hollow. The world no longer feeds you, and worse, neither does your old identity. You look in the mirror and no longer recognize the person staring back. Most people think this is depression. They call it burnout, despair, or even madness. But the mystics, those who walked the hidden path long before psychology had a name, knew better. This is what the ancients called Catabasis, the descent of the soul into darkness, often mirrored in mythology by figures like Orpheus, who traveled to the underworld in search of his beloved, or Inanna, the Sumerian goddess who passed through 7 gates, surrendering more and more of herself until nothing remained but the core. Teresa of Avila called this stage the dark night of the soul, not as punishment, but as sacred preparation. St. John of the Cross spoke of it too, of being stripped of all spiritual sweetness so that the soul could learn to love God not for what it received, but for what it is. And in a quiet parallel far from Europe's monasteries, in the Himalayas and deserts of India, yogis sat in caves and watched the unraveling of their minds with a kind of inner reverence. For them, this chaos was not failure. It was the rising of Kundalini, shaking loose the illusions and attachments that had bound the soul for lifetimes. But you must stay. That's the most difficult part. The moment you feel the collapse, when the emotions feel too heavy, when the world no longer makes sense, your instincts will beg you to run, to numb, to escape. But this is the doorway. This is the very portal every myth tried to whisper into your bones. The great Egyptian rites of death and rebirth weren't just for pharaohs. They were maps for the soul's evolution. The Book of the Dead wasn't merely about preparing for physical death. It was about dying while alive, shedding layers of falsehood to walk awake in eternity. Jung didn't just borrow from these traditions, he lived them. He found himself conversing with ancient figures, not as hallucination, but as symbol made alive. It was the mirror of Jesus fasting for 40 days, of Muhammad's night journey, of Buddha's confrontation with Mara beneath the Bodhi tree. The message is always the same. To know the truth, you must descend. There's no shortcut, no mantra that bypasses it, no affirmation that makes the storm disappear. What makes this sacred is not the avoidance of suffering, but the willingness to sit in it and ask, "What are you trying to show me?" For some, this breakdown appears as a slow unraveling, a job no longer fulfilling, a relationship that reveals its true nature, a dream that crumbles. For others, it comes suddenly: grief, betrayal, illness, isolation. And in those moments, you feel abandoned. But the truth, whispered from mystic to mystic across time, is this: you are never closer to the divine than when everything false is being stripped away. Jung's words echo this subtle paradox. He wrote, "To the extent that I managed to translate the emotions into images, that is to say, to find the images which were concealed in the emotions, I was inwardly calm and reassured." This was not art for art's sake. It was alchemy. It was turning chaos into clarity. In your own descent, you are called to do the same. To feel, yes, but also to observe. To become the witness of the storm while also being the one drenched in it. Because in that tension, between total surrender and clear observation, you begin to awaken a new center of gravity. One not built on external identity or achievement, but on something older, something rooted in being itself. And perhaps the most important truth to remember is this: your breakdown is not proof of failure. It is proof that your soul is brave enough to awaken. Most people never leave the surface. They repeat their lives, avoiding discomfort, avoiding depth. But you, something cracked open. You listened. You followed the thread inward. And even if you feel lost, that choice alone sets everything in motion. The mystic Ibn Arabi once wrote, "Beware of thinking that the road ends with the stage you are now at. The descent is not the end, it is the beginning. And what you find at the bottom of that descent is not emptiness, it is fire. But not a fire that burns you, a fire that burns off you everything you are not, so that what remains is soul." The fire that burns illusion, how the soul transforms pain into power. You don't have to look far to find someone telling you to stay positive, to raise your vibration, to just let it go. But what the mystics, sages, and seekers of every age knew is that the path to true awakening is not about avoiding your pain. It's about descending into it with open eyes, a willing heart, and a body that refuses to run. This is the fire Jung encountered in the Red Book. It's not the fire of punishment, but the fire of purification. the fire that does not destroy you, but instead removes the false layers wrapped around you, the masks, the roles, the wounds you clung to for identity. It burns illusion, it burns control, and what's left is the real you. This is the same fire spoken of by the Christian desert fathers, who fled to the wilderness to be emptied of the world and filled with God. It is the fire in Sufi mysticism, where the lover longs to be consumed in the presence of the beloved. Rumi wrote, "Try to be a sheet of paper with nothing on it. Be a spot of ground where nothing is growing, where something might be planted, a seed possibly, from the absolute." That is what the fire creates, emptiness that can finally hold the divine. To many, this stage feels unbearable. You may cry for days. Your thoughts may feel like storms with no sky to contain them. You might feel like you're being pulled apart, because in many ways, you are. The identity you built, the protection you've worn for years, it begins to melt in the heat of the inner flame. You realize how much of your life was built to protect you from feeling, and now you are feeling everything, but something ancient and quiet is watching you inside the fire, not judging, not afraid, just waiting that something is your soul, not your personality, not your trauma, not your story. Your soul has always known that the way forward is through, and as the illusions burn away, it begins to speak. You may hear it not as words, but as silence, a stillness that wasn't there before. You may feel it as a knowing in the belly, a warmth in the spine, a breath that begins to anchor you deeper than thought. This is the moment when the fire becomes a teacher. Jung wrote that the soul is not in me, I am in the soul. That one line, written after years of painful self-discovery, unlocks a truth most people never dare approach, that you are not a person trying to have a spiritual experience. You are spirit, wearing a temporary personhood. And the fire, it strips off the costume. And so you begin to see your pain differently. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What is this trying to show me?" You stop resisting the discomfort and instead lean in. And as you lean in, something starts to shift. Slowly, quietly. You stop identifying with the wound and begin listening to it. It speaks. It shows you that your sadness was not weakness, but the seed of your depth. That your anxiety was not failure, but a signal your soul had been cramped in a space too small. That your anger was not proof you're broken, but the fire's first sign that something real wanted to be born. The wound wasn't punishment, it was invitation. This understanding isn't intellectual, it's alchemical. Just as lead becomes gold in the hands of a true alchemist, so too does your pain become wisdom when it's held, listened to, and loved. Kundalini traditions speak of this as tapas, a Sanskrit word that means both heat and austerity. The burning discipline of turning inward, the willingness to sit in the discomfort without distraction until clarity arises not from logic, but from direct experience. You begin to understand why mystics like Ramakrishna sat for hours in longing, why St. Francis embraced poverty and solitude, why the Buddha chose stillness under the Bodhi tree, even as Mara tempted and threatened him. They were not chasing visions, they were burning through illusion. There's a story told in Sufi circles about a man who wandered the desert for years, searching for God. One day, dehydrated and exhausted, he collapsed under the weight of the sun. In his final breath, he whispered, "Why have you hidden from me?" And in that stillness, the answer came, "I was in the thirst. I was in the heat. I was in the ache. You were looking for me everywhere but the fire." And so you begin to realize your breakdown was never a detour, it was the path. Your tears were not failures, they were baptisms, and the fire wasn't sent to destroy you, it was sent to show you what you truly are, unburnable. Jung emerged from his fire with a new understanding. He no longer sought to be cured in the old sense. He didn't try to return to the man he once was. He had met the unconscious and survived. And because of that, he became a mirror for the rest of us. A way shower, a lantern on the trail. You are walking that trail now. And soon, perhaps already, you'll begin to feel the embers cooling, not because the fire has gone out, but because you have changed. You've become the flame, and from that flame, new life will rise. Becoming the flame. At first, the silence can feel terrifying. When the voices that usually chatter inside your mind go quiet, when distraction loses its flavor, when ambition feels flat, and even the things that once comforted you leave you cold, that's not failure. That's the invitation. That's the doorway Jung stood at when he began the Red Book. A door that doesn't open outward but inward. This is where the journey becomes real. It's no longer about seeking light. It's about stepping into your own darkness without flinching. There, in the hush beneath your thoughts, you'll meet what Jung met. A figure who doesn't speak until your own inner noise dies down. He doesn't appear to entertain you or to feed your fantasies. He waits until you're finally still enough to listen, not with ears, but with your being. He is the one who's always been there, silent, observing, patient, the part of you that has seen it all, held it all, and waits for you to stop performing so you can finally remember. But that's not the only one you meet. In Jung's visions, another figure emerged. The Red One, seductive, shadowy, a force that pulled him into temptation and discomfort, into suppressed desires and long-forgotten longings. This wasn't some devil Jung tried to exorcise. He didn't cast it out. He didn't label it evil. He listened. Every mood that appears from nowhere, every unexplained pull toward chaos or numbness, every strange emotion you feel without reason. These are not errors. These are messages. The shadow doesn't want to harm you. It wants to be known. And this is the part the world doesn't teach you. That awakening isn't a mountaintop. It's a descent, a falling inward into the caves you've sealed off. And what's inside those caves? Not monsters, not demons, but aspects of your soul you were taught to hide. The sensual, the furious, the grieving, the wild, the tender, the still. Jung realized that the soul begins to revolt when you deny these parts for too long. But revolt doesn't look how you expect. It doesn't always come with drama or tears. Sometimes it's numbness. You stop caring about the things that once thrilled you. You drift through your days like a ghost, your body heavy, your mind foggy. The music that once made your heart race now feels distant. Even joy tastes bland. You think something's wrong with you, that you're broken, but you're not broken. You're being rewired. Your psyche is pulling the plug on surface-level signals so it can redirect your attention deeper, deeper than scrolling, deeper than pretending, deeper than saying you're fine when you're not. And this is why Jung's Red Book is not a relic. It's a roadmap. He stopped treating the unconscious as an enemy. He stopped seeing his inner chaos as pathology. He started treating it as a language not of words, but of symbols, of moods that have no story, of dreams that speak louder than reason, of urges that seem irrational until you sit with them long enough to hear what they're actually saying. What modern life calls mental health issues, many mystics have called initiations. Your apathy is not laziness. It's the soul saying, "I'm tired of pretending." Your sadness is not failure. It's grief for all the parts of you were never allowed to be. Your anger isn't a flaw. It's a fire that hasn't been given direction yet. When you realize this, truly realize it, you stop resisting. You stop fighting yourself, and you begin the integration. This is where real power is born, not the power to impress or dominate, but the power to stay present with everything inside you, without needing to fix it. That's how you become the flame. You begin to understand what the Sufis meant when they said, "Die before you die." You begin to feel the truth behind the alchemical axiom. As above, so below. As within, so without. You realize that the more of yourself you integrate, the more whole the world seems. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Integration doesn't mean becoming perfect. It means becoming real. It means letting the Red One speak, and hearing him not as temptation, but as your wounded sensual self needing acknowledgement. It means allowing silence to strip away your performances until you can finally sit in your own presence without shame. It means letting grief rise like a tide, not because you're drowning, but because you're finally not running from the water. And in that water, in that silence, in that fire, you find something else. Stillness. Not the kind that numbs, but the kind that knows. Stillness becomes your new rhythm. You stop chasing highs. You stop needing to be understood. You stop trying to force your path. You start listening to the body, to the symbols, to the dreams. You begin to live like a mystic, not because you read about them, but because you became one. You no longer treat your mind like a machine to control. You treat it like a temple to honor. And once you have that, you are no longer just a person trying to find purpose. You become the purpose. Awakening through the fire of truth. If Jung were sitting across from you, he'd lean in gently and say, "This is where it begins. You're not failing. You're waking up." And he wouldn't be the only one. The Buddha said the same thing, though with different words. In the early Buddhist texts, despair, dukkha, is not a sign of spiritual failure, but the first noble truth. It is the beginning of wisdom. Because when you can finally feel your suffering without numbing it, you are standing at the threshold of liberation. We think we're in control, but most of us are being puppeted by forgotten feelings, by abandoned versions of ourselves. Jung didn't try to erase them. He let them speak. He gave them names. He listened. This is what the Buddhist practice of Vipassana asks of us too, not to suppress or escape what arises, but to observe it, fully, without judgment. The monks who practice this meditation sit in silence for days, weeks, sometimes years, not to become peaceful, but to become clear, to peel back the illusions of ego and see reality as it is, impermanent, interconnected, and deeply alive. And as your own illusions begin to fall away, something else happens. You lose interest in the game, not because you're numb, but because you're starting to remember. You remember that applause doesn't equal meaning, that followers don't equal love, that success without truth is just another kind of prison. You post something vulnerable online and no one reacts, but it doesn't crush you. You speak your truth and they misunderstand, but you don't chase their approval. Why? Because you've finally tasted something real, and once you taste that, once you feel the peace that comes from being whole inside, you lose your appetite for anything fake. This is the detox, and it's brutal. You realize how approval was a drug, a beautiful, addictive drug that sedated your true self. Every like, every compliment, every performance, it kept you asleep. But now that you're waking up, you don't want that anymore. You want silence, solitude, self-respect. That's the Dharma, the natural law the Buddha spoke of. When you begin aligning with your nature, you begin shedding what isn't you, and the world reacts. Your presence becomes a mirror. You don't have to say a word. Just being yourself makes people uncomfortable. You speak calmly and they feel judged. You set a boundary and they feel abandoned. You tell the truth and they feel exposed. But it's not your words that hurt them. It's their own reflection. because now that you are no longer pretending, they're forced to see the ways they still are. And not everyone is ready for that. This is what mystics from every tradition have faced. Jung faced it in Zurich. The more deeply he journeyed into the psyche, the more he was mocked, exiled, called mad. Even other psychologists distanced themselves from him. He walked alone, but he did not turn back. Neither did the Buddha, who left behind his kingdom, or Rumi, when he lost everything and wandered for years, writing poetry from the fire of his soul. This phase is not a metaphor, it's real. You lose friends, you lose clarity. You might even lose your sense of identity. Because once you've seen your soul, once you've felt the magnitude of what lives inside you, you cannot unsee it, and you cannot go back to pretending. Let's be honest, this part of awakening can stretch on for weeks, months, years. There is no promised timeline. The soul doesn't keep a calendar, it keeps truth. And truth, by nature, is not polite. It doesn't care if you're comfortable. It doesn't care if others approve. It comes with fire, because fire is what purifies. In alchemy, fire burns the dross from gold. In Buddhism, tapas, spiritual heat, is necessary to burn off karma. So when your life feels like it's falling apart, maybe it's not. Falling apart, maybe it's burning clean. And when all that remains is ash, stillness, silence, then the real presence begins. The presence that is not for show, not for status, but for truth. And truth is what sets you free. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.